I challenge you to a duel.
Hello and welcome to episode 12 of the Movie Duel podcast. My name is Peter and I am your host. On each episode of the Movie Duel podcast, we select a subject based around movies, and then myself and my co-host each pick a film that we think best fits that subject. So last time on Movie Duel, I was joined by Tarquin and Mandrake, and we were discussing our choices for Best Outlaw Biker Movie, in which we discussed Mad Max and Psychomania. On this episode, I will be discussing the best Bond film with a brand new guest co-host, Mr. Jamie Russell. But before we get into that, just a few points of order. First of all, just to remind you of how you can get in touch with us here at Movie Duel Podcast. First of all, you can contact us through our Facebook page, which is facebook.com/Movie Duel Podcast. You can contact us via email, movieduelpodcast@gmail.com, and you can contact us through our Twitter page, which is @MovieDuelPod. And as I have been doing on the last couple of episodes, I'd like to take the time to point you all in the direction of another great movie podcast. This week, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about MOVIEDRONE, which is something that this week's guest host put me onto. He's guested on those. You'll hear us talk about the MOVIEDRONE during the episode, but it's a movie podcast hosted Steve and Mark. I've become a little bit hooked to it. It is something I listen to quite regularly now, and have been sort of dipping into their back catalogue, which they've got 250 episodes. They've just released their 250th, but it's a great podcast. Really great guys. They are quite interactive as well. You can send them questions. I did that for their latest episode, in which I challenged them to pick their top 5 movie duels, and you'll also hear them read out my choice for the top 5 as well, so you'll be able to see what I think are the best sort of fights in movies. And they also discuss Finnish action film Sisu, which is a fairly new release, something I watched quite recently as well. So you get to hear their thoughts on that, as well as multiple different things. A really great podcast, like I say, and would thoroughly recommend it. And just a few notes about this episode of Movie Duel. We did have some technical issues. There is a little bit of crossover audio. I've tried to edit that as best as possible, so it's not quite as clean as we can sometimes be on Movie Duel, but you'll still hear things pretty clearly, and hopefully isn't too distracting. So without further ado, let's head on over to the main discussion.
Welcome, James. It's been a long time. And finally, here we are. What took you so long? Cuckoo.
Okay, so welcome to the Movie Duel podcast to Jamie Russell. Hello, Jamie.
Hello.
How are you today?
Feeling hot. As a fair-haired, pale-skinned Scot, this heat is just not good for me.
It's not good. Not good at all.
No. I'm struggling, to be honest.
It's we have to suffer for our art in the podcasting world, because you can't sit and have a fan on and windows open and everything else. You've got to just sort of grin and bear it, I'm afraid.
Absolutely.
Sat like Ace Ventura in the back of a rhino.
Kind of hot in these rhinos.
So, do you want to tell the listeners a little bit about yourself, Jamie?
Okay. So I'm a 40-something English and film studies teacher. I'll say a little bit about how I actually got into podcasting. It was really as a result of lockdown, to be perfectly honest. I listened to podcasts prior to that, but they were professional podcasts. So it was Mark and Commode, the Empire podcast. But I never really considered independent podcasting. And so it was during lockdown, and I realised that I wasn't watching enough films at all. As a film studies teacher, students were asking me questions about the latest films, and I just hadn't seen them. And I was half the time I was sort of lying, saying, "Yeah, I've seen that." At all, busy family life tends to get in the way, doesn't it? So lockdown gave me the opportunity. I've got all this extra time now. I really want to just rekindle my love for film. So I started up a letterbox account, and I was watching lots of films. And one film that I reviewed was replied to by Paul from FILMBUSTERS.
Excellent.
And he said, well, we've just covered this film. Why don't you give our podcast a listen and tell us what you think? And from that point onwards, I was gripped on these podcasts. And I didn't actually record first with FILMBUSTERS. I also listened to quite a few other podcasts, and another one was MOVIEDRONE, and they were very generous to offer me to come on and guest. And I chose John Carpenter's The Thing. And I just hadn't really thought about guesting. I was always just thinking, I'm a listener, and I enjoyed it. I really enjoyed it. I thought, well, this is great, and it wasn't a disaster, the first one, and which always helps. And just went on from there. And the podcasting community is just so collaborative, so friendly. Yeah. And so how I got to your podcast, well, that was actually, I've been meaning to mention a friend of mine. This is someone I went to school with, secondary school. His name is Mark Love, and he contributes a lot to Evolution of Horror discussion group. I actually got him on to that podcast, so I think this is something you'd be really interested in. And so then he loves it and contributes a lot. And he is also, I think he is friends with Vanessa.
Yeah, I believe so.
Yes, well, they communicate through Evolution of Horror, I think. And she told Mark that you were looking for guests, and he told me, and the rest they say is geography. No, I got that wrong.
Well, I think, it's definitely, I mean, you've, just from speaking to you in the first instance, you put me onto MOVIEDRONE and to FILMBUSTERS, the two podcasts that I've listened to no end of their episodes over the last couple of months, and really sort of got into those, and they are really good guys. I've communicated with Paul from the FILMBUSTERS crew, and
be
Mark, yes, from MOVIEDRONE. And it is such a great community in that sort of amateur podcasting background, I suppose. Everybody's, retweeting each other's posts and pushing for more of an audience, and it's just a great little community. And I'm not a big user of Twitter, or I wasn't until the last sort of month or so, but it's a really good community on there, and so thank you very much for putting me into that direction.
And Twitter was the other thing I ended up joining for lockdown. I'm sure my wife thought I was going through a midlife crisis, but yeah.
Did you buy a leather jacket?
Yeah, I'm sure I did.
Well, okay, so obviously, with this being your first time on the Movie Duel podcast, hopefully the first of many, the unwritten rule is that I get to pick the first subject.
Okay.
So the first subject that I picked for you, Jamie, was to pick your choice for the best Bond movie. So
yes,
this is a movie series that's quite close to my heart. It filled many an hour in my younger years. A lot of fond memories of watching Bond films on various different platforms. What's your sort of history with Bond? Are you a fan in general?
I think very similar to you in that it was a very influential part of my childhood, growing up with the Bond films. And we are both, I'm sort of presuming here, but we are both of the age of sort of pre-satellite viewing days. Well, I am certainly pre-satellite. And what I mean by that is, just having BBC One, BBC Two, ITV, Channel 4. And I think there's so much choice now, and it's taken away a little bit of that sort of that experiencing something really special. And so, yeah, on key holidays, there was always, Christmas in particular, I remember, there was always 2 or 3 really, good Bond films.
Yeah.
And it was something that I watched as a young, impressionable boy, should I say? and it is just sort of, it's the ideal sort of male fantasy thing, isn't it? So this ultimate cool super spy agent, licensed to kill, gadgets, fast cars, ladies. It's just this sort of male fantasy figure, and for a young impressionable individual, it's going to be effective, isn't it?
What more can you want?
Yeah, exactly. So and so I remember watching. I did watch whatever Bond film was available, but it was particularly the Roger Moore Bond films that I was particularly familiar with. So my choice, I think, has been influenced by, Roger Moore being the predominant Bond in the late 70s and 80s when I was particularly watching the Bond films. So yeah,
I think it's almost a bit like the relationship that people have with Doctor Who. You have your Doctor Who if you're a fan, or if if you just watched it when you were younger. It's always going to be more than likely going to be that one that you grew up with or that you saw at the age that you were watching it, basically.
Yeah,
and they're the one you're going to have the fondest memories of as well, I suppose.
Yeah. Absolutely, and it's memorable for all sorts of reasons. My wife is a very big Bond fan, and in fact, Goldeneye was the first Bond film that we watched at the cinema.
Oh, wow!
And we've watched all of the subsequent ones after that. So yeah.
Okay, so a little bit of background about James Bond. James Bond was created by British journalist and novelist Ian Fleming in 1953. He is the protagonist in a series of novels, films, comics, and video games. Fleming wrote 12 Bond novels and 2 short story collections. Eon Productions, which was responsible for the official James Bond film series, started by Albert R. Cubby Broccoli and Harry Saltzman in 1961, after they sought financing and gained the rights to Dr. No. There have been 25 official Bond films that have been made since, ending with 2021's No Time to Die, which neither of us picked. Did you enjoy that one, though?
Yeah, not really, to be fair.
We'll maybe get onto the Daniel Craig era at some point during this podcast. But he has been played by Sean Connery, George Lazenby, Roger Moore, Timothy Dalton, Pierce Brosnan, and Daniel Craig, all in the official Eon series. And also, I believe, is it David Niven?
Correct, Casino Royale.
In Casino Royale. And once again by Sean Connery, unofficially, with a very, very bad hairpiece in Never Say Never Again. So, some facts for you, Jamie. James Bond, the name James Bond was taken from a birdwatching book that Ian Fleming owned. He chose that name as the most sort of mundane name that he could find that wouldn't be interesting to anybody in a spy capacity, I suppose. There are more actors who have played Blofeld than have played Bond, with 7 playing the supervillain and 6 playing the super spy. Eon stands for Everything or Nothing, and was used as a title for a game on the PlayStation 2 in 2004, and was considered for the title of multiple films. Maud Adams is the only actress to play 2 Bond girls, firstly in The Man with the Golden Gun, and secondly in Octopussy.
I have some trivia.
Oh, go on. I like trivia.
Very famous individual was arguably very influential in the James Bond films getting produced in the first place as actual films. Do you know who that famous person is?
JFK.
Correct. Yes, it was 1961. He said that his favourite book was From Russia with Love, and that just catapulted Ian Fleming's sales and paved the way, really, I think, for Dr. No the following year.
Have you read any of the novels?
I haven't, to be perfectly honest. My wife has read all of them. Yeah. I haven't, no.
I've only read a couple. I mean, they are vastly different to the films. The films are only very loosely based on the books, and you don't really have the big sort of descriptions of any big action set pieces or anything like that, which are obviously a staple of the films, but they're not fantastic literature.
Originally, Ian Fleming was not supportive of Sean Connery being cast as Bond. He felt he was going to be too rough, and well, Sean Connery is working class bodybuilder from Edinburgh, so I'm not surprised he thought that. But when he found out that he had lots of female admirers, he thought, well, yes, maybe he could actually be effective as Bond. And Roger Moore was actually originally in consideration as well, alongside Connery. But he was contractually caught up with TV shows at the time and couldn't actually do it.
Yeah, no problem. So obviously, with it being my choice of subject, Jamie, it was down to you to have first pick of selection. So would you like to let the people know what you went for?
Certainly. Well, I went for The Spy Who Loved Me.
Ever get the feeling somebody doesn't like you?
We've lost one of our nuclear submarines.
Where's 007?
This tracing means the Russians can track our nuclear submarines underwater and sink them.
Somebody got hold of the plans of that tracking system and is trying to sell them. That missing submarine had 16 Polaris missiles aboard.
You are very suspicious, Mr. Bond.
Oh, I find I live much longer that way.
Now pay attention, 007. I want you to take great care of this equipment. There are one or two rather special accessories.
Q, have I ever let you down?
Frequently.
12 noon, they will have reached firing position. Within minutes, New York and Moscow will cease to exist. Global destruction will follow. The new era will begin.
Egyptian builders?
British agent in love with the Russian agent. Détente indeed.
I have a message for you.
I think you just delivered it. Every person who even comes into contact with that microfilm is to be eliminated.
When this mission is over, I will kill you.
Directed by Lewis Gilbert, writer Christopher Wood, Richard Mayerbaum, and uncredited contributions from author Ian Fleming, which I wasn't aware of before.
No.
Cast, Roger Moore, of course, James Bond, Barbara Bach as Major Anya Amasova, Kurt Jurgens, Stromberg, the famous Richard Keel, something I should have mentioned before, it's something that terrified me as a child watching this, as Jaws, Bernard Lee, Desmond Llewellyn, of course, as Q, and Lewis Maxwell as Miss Moneypenny. And production, I thought I'd put it production design as well.
Okay.
Because Ken Adams and his production design, he's a legend, and his production design in this film is spectacular.
It's a lovely looking film.
Yeah.
I'd forgotten how good this film looks, yeah.
So, in a globe-trotting assignment that has him skiing off the edges of cliffs and driving a car deep underwater, British super spy James Bond unites with sexy Russian agent Anya Amasova to defeat megalomaniac shipping magnate Karl Stromberg, who is threatening to destroy New York with nuclear weapons. Bond's most deadly adversary on the case is Stromberg's henchman Jaws, a 7-foot giant with terrifying teeth.
It really is quintessential Bond, isn't it? Spy Who Loved Me, is when you think Bond, this is everything that...
It's like a checklist of all of them.
Yes, yeah, exactly. So, do you remember the first time you saw this?
I don't remember the first time, to be honest. I would have been young, I'd been 7 or 8 or something like that. I just remember watching it a lot. And yeah, there's this key sequence in it that's, well, I just so memorable to me, watching it back recently. And quite a few of them were with Jaws. I mean, he did have just such a effect on me. Just terrified me as a child. Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's a very, even though looking back at it now, it's quite a sort of comical appearance, and you can sort of see obviously that he's very, very much struggling with the teeth, and as I think he's gone on record to say that it wasn't the most comfortable of appliances to be working with.
They were agony, apparently, and they were designed by. Do you know?
No, I don't know.
They were designed by Stanley Kubrick's daughter.
Wow. Okay, is that the same daughter who made the Shining documentary?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Oh, right, okay. But yeah, Jaws, he's again, is that sort of quintessential villain, silent, deadly. I agree with what you're saying. I think he's very scary, especially if you're watching this as a young lad in late 80s, early 90s, should we say. Just somebody biting at your neck. It's very sort of vampiric, and that's his modus operandi is biting somebody's neck. And I don't really remember any other sort of Bond henchman being quite that sort of violent, I suppose. The only Bond
henchman to return as well.
Yes, exactly. But probably a little less said about that, the better.
Yes, that wasn't one of my. Yeah, it was basically that was a response to Star Wars being so successful.
Yeah.
And you thought, well, everyone wants science fiction now, so let's send Bond into space.
Yeah, I mean, there's some good bits about Moonraker. I like Michael Longsdale's a brilliant villain in that, but the rest of it is, double taking pigeons and. But anyway, yeah, let's not talk about Moonraker.
No, let's not. Yeah,
No.
So one of the reasons why I chose this is that it was a real sort of response, I think, because at the time, The Man with the Golden Gun failed at the box office.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's Roger Moore's second film. It actually earned less than On Her Majesty's Secret Service, which is considered to be really disappointing.
Mm-hmm.
So it was really a case of, the franchise could have ended at that point. It was really needing something special. And so Broccoli was the sole producer, I believe, for this film.
At this point, I think he was, yes. Yeah.
And he decided to go big. He picked out the things that were successful from the Connery Bonds, and the globe-trotting element needs to be there. So let's have lots of multiple exotic destinations.
Yeah.
Let's have a spectacular opening credit sequence with fantastic stunts. This sort of things that then become the blueprint for future Bond films. We need to have a megalomaniac villain for Bond. We need to have a really memorable henchman, and all of these elements are really in The Spy Who Loved Me. They doubled the budget. So that's saying that they really were going all out for this. If this had failed, it would have been the end of Bond, potentially. But I think Roger Moore was struggling. I think he struggled in the first two films to move away from Connery's shadow.
Yeah,
that he was struggling to find his identity as Bond, and this is the film where he really found his feet, and he was much more convincing as Bond. And
I think it's really that sort of middle ground for Moore, isn't it? It doesn't end up being. It doesn't go to the silly lengths that some of the next few do.
Yeah.
But it moves on from, like you say, moves away from the Connery Bonds. It's where he stamps his own identity on Bond in this film.
Yeah, I think there's something about the third film, in particular, Bond series, because Connery's third film was Goldfinger.
Mm-hmm.
Moore's, of course, is this. Craig's is Skyfall. Brosnan's would have been.
World is not enough.
I'm not sure if that's his highlight.
No. Well, we will get into this when we talk about
Yeah.
my choice. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think, you're right. I think that is, Goldfinger's definitely the highlight of Connery, and Skyfall's definitely the highlight of Daniel Craig. Obviously, Dalton and Lazenby never got to sort of enter into that discussion, really. But I think, just to go off kilter a little bit, I think Dalton got there with his second one, I think, even though it was a completely different kind of Bond film.
He was asked originally before Lazenby to do Bond, but he considered himself to be too young.
Definitely, he would definitely have been. Yeah. I would consider the hallmarks of a great Bond film. There's certain things, and one of those is going to be the villain, the Bond villain. How do you think Karl Stromberg is as a Bond villain?
He might not be up there with the best of the Bond villains, but I do think he is effective. I think, unfortunately, a little bit of it is you can't get away from the Austin Powers parodying of certain Bond characters, and of course you see that in what Mike Myers did with some of these characters. But no, I think he's got some great lines, and he's got this sort of sadistic element to him, which was, quite threatening. And I thought he was good. I mean, I'm not going to sort of say that he's the best of the villains in the series, but I think he's a strong villain. I think he's stronger than Sean Bean.
Interesting. Okay, we'll leave that for a little bit later. I mean, he's obviously limited by the script in terms of the fact that he doesn't leave his stronghold, really. He's he's just literally sat in his headquarters. I think there's this story of that he's comfortable under the sea, and he thinks that's where the future lies, and very much they're very much sort of retread it in Moonraker, in that the Drax character wants to keep the human race going in space, where he wants to sort of keep the human race going under the sea.
Yeah, but
I'll avoid singing Little Mermaid.
Yeah. But I quite like that. It gives a sense that this is his domain, this is his lair. That's not. I don't think that's a negative of the script as such. But I can see how
he doesn't really get a lot
to do beyond that.
To do a lot.
Yeah.
And he's sort of menacing speeches, and he's not very sort of threatening physically. And I think that in that sort of the climax of the film, he's sort of dispatched relatively easy, which I think you can level that at a lot of different Bond villains. I think they're just sort of secret layer and giving sort of speeches and making these sort of quippy one-liners. I don't think it's a bad villain or the worst villain. I mean, some of the worst villains in Bond have been the most sort of charismatic, but I think the film could have been so much more if he'd have been a bit more proactive, shall we say. And the other part of a Bond film, key part of a Bond film, is the Bond girl.
Oh, girls, plural.
Or girls, yes, indeed. And I was quite surprised with this film, actually, because obviously one of the sort of key points that's sort of thrown at especially the older Bond films is that they're extremely sort of sexist and not they don't portray female characters in a fantastic light, and this for a Roger Moore Bond film is not too bad in that perspective.
Yeah, because it sort of plays on that when she's first introduced. It's been a while since I watched the film, but it's along the lines of that. They are calling this agent, and you see this man in bed, hairy chest, and looking very sort of manly. So, you're assuming that this is going to be the Russian agent,
the most British Russian agent in the world.
Yes, and then you find out that it's someone else, and it's a woman. What's her name?
It's Mrs. Ringo Starr.
That's correct. Anya Amasova.
Triple X.
Yes. But I heard...
No innuendo there at all.
I heard that she wasn't particularly happy with certain elements of her character, apparently,
Right.
and she wasn't hugely, impressed with... She basically felt that James Bond was a misogynist.
Mm.
So she wasn't particularly happy, apparently, doing it. That's why I read. But I think considering the other Bond girls that have gone before her, she was lucky to have one that was much more progressive on the surface, anyway.
Oh, definitely, yeah. She's she has, for a vast majority of the film, she's got one up on Bond. She's one step ahead of him.
Anyway, right to the very end, you're not sure about her whether she might take revenge.
Exactly, yeah. But as with all of them,
they succumb.
It's the eyebrow. It's got to be on it.
I'm just thinking of the spitting image puppet of Roger Moore eyebrow when you say that.
Yeah, I think she's a pretty good Bond girl. I think if you're going to use that term, I think it's probably not the best term to use these days. But she's a fairly competent actress.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think she's. I can't think of anything else I've seen her in other than. What's the film with Ringo Starr in? Yellowbeard. I'm sure she's in that. It's a very obscure film, really bizarre. I wouldn't recommend it.
Okay. And so it's.
Sorry.
I mean, lots of sort of really good set pieces in the film. So I mentioned the opening credit sequence, just brilliant stunt sequences and the skiing. Although whenever you see a close up of Bond, you see got this terrible rear screen projection behind him.
Yeah. Well, I don't think that goes until the late 90s because there's a little bit of that in My Choice, which is another 20 years in the future. Yeah. So I think that's just a staple of Bond.
Oh yeah. and then the big title sequence song. I think the most effective ones are sung by big female artists. So Carly Simon for this.
I think it's a very interesting Bond theme because I don't think it's quite different to anything that came before it. I don't think it's overly Bondy, if that's even a phrase. That may be a phrase that we're just creating now.
Is it that the lyrics are iconic? But yeah, I can see what you mean. It doesn't quite have tone, I suppose, of and styling of some of the other ones. But no, I like it, and then you got the iconic opening of his parachute, Union Jack.
Well, it's the first. I can't think of another example beforehand where Bond is so patriotic in that he's got the obviously the Union Jack on the.
That's right, and he's
on the parachute,
and he's dressed in Navy uniform for quite a lot of the start of the film as well, isn't he?
Yeah,
absolutely.
And I think that's probably the first instance that I can think of. Anyway, I don't think there's another example of that earlier on where he's being openly sort of patriotic and he's got he's not the best spy in the world.
But I think Roger Moore, particularly in this film, he just feels like the right Bond, and I think that this is probably what Ian Fleming had in mind when he was coming up with Bond, and he's got that sort of sophisticated, gentlemanly approach, which is different to Connery, who had a much sort of stronger approach, but very humorous as well. I'd forgotten how much humour he put into. I think he had a good relationship, I understand, with the director. And they really worked well together, and he helped him bring along the humour. And he seemed to be comfortable using the humour, whereas in the previous films he just wasn't. This is the film where he came into his own as Bond.
Yeah, well, I think this very much like My Choice is that the humour is kept, or the right humour is kept to the right points of the film. The silliness and the slapstick is there present in the scenes with Q and Desmond Llewellyn, and the over the top sort of practical effects and these silly gadgets and things like that. And then it's the humour outside of that is left to maybe the one-liners from Moore and stuff like that. There's no sort of slapstick or visual comedy either side of that scene where he meets. Is it in the pyramids? I think, isn't it, where they go and they see the sort of the different gadgets that Q's got on show.
Yeah, and what do you think of the submarine car? Shall we call it swimming car?
Well, I think it's one of those things that's probably a little bit of a stretch.
Oh yeah,
in terms of realism, obviously, but
at least it's not an invisible car.
Yeah, exactly. It's but I think the way it's filmed and the way that that it's shot are really effective.
It's very, very, very clever. It's seamless. I mean, I was deliberately looking to see if I could work out the difference. Sort of, they had, I think, 6 different designs that were used, different models, and it's just so well done. But yeah, again, that was another distinct memory from watching this when I was younger. The car was just that just blew my mind. So anything sort of gadgetry linked with the cars was inspiring for me.
I was definitely surprised how much on rewatch spycraft there is going in this film as well. There's a lot, there's a lot of exposition that's sort of set around James Bond being a spy, and not just going from one set piece to another. The first, obviously after the introduction and everything else, the first third of the film, even into the second sort of into the middle act, there's a lot of spy work going on. These two opposing agents are fighting for the same sort of information, and I think that was probably stuff that was missed from a lot of, especially Moore's tenure as Bond. The spy work was definitely missing from there. Even though some of it is quite repetitive in this film, there's a lot of getting a lead. That lead is killed by Jaws. Then they get the next bit of information. Then that lead is killed by Jaws. But I think it's there to sort of showcase the locations in this film. Whether it's the pyramids or these ruins, and taking a ride in the back of a telecommunications van and things like that. There's a lot of sort of set pieces that are set in Egypt, I think it is, isn't it?
Yeah.
This sort of secondary Bond villain, is it Shandor, I think his name is, who's this sort of peanut-looking guy that gets sort of tossed off into the No, that's not right. I'll start that again. That gets
dispatched.
Dispatched, yes. Well, he sort of throws him off the off the thing, doesn't he?
Yeah.
I've lost my train of thought completely. Back to you, Jamie. You pick something to talk about.
No, I just I'm sort of trying to think of all. I mean, it's just all of that. As I said before, it's establishing this blueprint really for what makes a successful Bond film, and yeah, the set pieces were spectacular. Leading up, I mean, say the production design. I have to mention Kane Adams again. The production design is just spectacular. And the Atlantis underwater, just amazing. It's all building up to that. So I think you're getting the sense that it is building up to something quite momentous as a showdown.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't even think there's the point where I think it's somewhere in the middle of the film where the Atlantis sort of comes out of the ocean, and they're riding underneath. And I couldn't figure out how they'd done it, whether that was miniature, whether it was some kind of, forced perspective or what. I just could not figure it out. Yeah. It looked amazing.
Absolutely. And it's this sort of large scale, by doubling the budget, they've sort of made it very clear, where they want to take this, as a series. They want it to be large scale, big set pieces, real sort of sense of stakes. And that's what you have in Spy Love Me. And I think that's what makes it just very memorable and really successful. And that's why I chose it.
So I've got a couple of questions for you regarding The Spy Who Loved Me.
Go on in.
Well, this one's maybe more of a general thing, but
I do have one thing.
Go on.
What famous director was originally approached to direct The Spy Who Loved Me?
I know this from somewhere in the back of my head.
Very famous director.
Was it Kubrick?
No. Can't imagine Kubrick doing a Bond film.
Spielberg?
Correct. Yes. Spielberg was very keen on doing a Bond film. He was approached. I understand he declined at that particular point. I think he was a bit busy on another project. He ended up doing Close Encounters, I think. But we know from Jaws that he's a big Bond fan. He left a little clue. So there's a scene in Jaws when they catch that first shark, which is obviously not the actual shark, and they take it back and they cut it open to see what's inside. When they're cutting it open, taking everything out, a car registration plate comes out, and it's got 007 on it. And so that was Spielberg basically saying, I want to direct a Bond film. And there are obviously clear sort of influences in Spy Who Loved Me from Jaws. And naming the main henchman Jaws was an obvious nod to that, I presume. I think I remember a documentary about Indiana Jones, and he said that he felt Indiana Jones was his James Bond, and he wanted, especially with things like Indiana Jones girls rather than Bond girls and things like that, and he really saw that as his attempt at doing Bond. But yeah, I've got a question for you, Jamie. Is side boob a staple of 70s cinema? That's an interesting question.
As an academic as you are.
Well, I'm not sure if I'm... That's a rather niche area you've chosen of academia.
I seem to remember, whether it's just from Bond, I don't know, but certainly things like what's the other example I thought of? Clash of the Titans, which I mean is I think 1980, so that's maybe a little bit later.
81.
But it seems to, or even Carry On films,
Yeah,
a hell of a lot of side boob.
Yeah, well, it was their way of. I can only presume it was their way of getting as close as possible to nudity without actually having the nudity, because then they can then get that through the censors, and the American censors, they were legendary. I was obsessed with censorship when I was growing up, and American censors apparently had real issues. Always have had issues with sex and nudity, but not violence. So probably that is a way of getting, if you are showing any more than just the side, then you're likely to be caught. Then that's going to have to be cut if you want to get your PG or PG-13 or whatever the rate would have been in America. I think it probably would have been. We need to give a little bit of. We want to go as close as we can to have an actual nudity, and so that's as far as we can go. That's my...
There we go. Thank you.
Has that helped?
It just sort of popped in there because I thought, you saw a lot of it back in those sort of times, and I suppose it's the reverse for the British censors, isn't it? You did. That's British films had a lot of nudity and a lot less violence.
That's right. Yeah.
What did you think of Bond of Arabia? His little stint as in his Arabian gear, popping to see. Yes. It looks very much like he sort of.
I'd forgotten about that. Yes.
He dropped out of an Amdram nativity, and
yes, that wasn't the greatest. Yes.
It's better than his Western get up in Moonraker.
I must have selectively blanked that out of my watching memory.
Well, it is one. It's definitely the best Roger Moore Bond film.
Oh, it's 100%.
But it's not. It certainly has some of those staples that made the Roger Moore years not the best, or considered.
Oh, going in.
Well, I think those sorts of things where he's dressed up in,
that's a very minor thing, though. I don't think that it's so minor that I'd forgotten about it.
Oh no, don't get me wrong. I'm a big proponent of The Spy Who Loved Me. It's definitely one of the best Moore films. it's probably his best. I think there's a couple that are maybe underrated as Bond films, but in terms of his acting, it's probably the best he's acted in a Bond film. There's a certain point where he mentions his wife, obviously from the storyline from On Her Majesty's Secret Service, and that's actually acted quite well for Roger Moore. It's he displays a lot of emotion. He plays it really well. It's definitely his best performance as Bond, definitely. I think there's a couple of bits that are sort of retreads of past Bond. We get another fight on a train, which has been done obviously in From Russia with Love, which is definitely the best train fight in a Bond film. Robert Shaw, brilliant. And obviously Live and Let Die, which was only, 2 films before this as well. Yeah. The retread in that already. And then the only other thing I've got to add to this film really is an X-Files connection.
Now, I deliberately didn't go back and watch it again because I was just wanting to see it, hear from you, Mr. Quest. I wasn't. I'm a massive X-Files fan, and we'll be able to speak about this later. I wasn't thinking that there would be any X-Files connections with this film because of its age.
I thought, thinking these 2 films, they're primarily British films, I suppose. Yeah. Obviously, there's a lot of sort of Americanisms and Americanness to the films, but I was thinking this is going to be a tough one. And literally, the first film I watched in terms of research was yours, and within 5 minutes there was an X-Files connection. I was like, that's it, done. So the X-Files connection is Mr. Walter Gottel, who plays General Gogol.
Ah.
He was Victor Klemper in season 3's Paperclip.
Really?
The man who's obsessed with his orchids and genetic modification of alien-human hybrids.
Yes. Wow. Now, did you see that, or did you research into it?
No, I saw that. As soon as I saw him, I thought that's it. Wow. X-Files connection.
Impressive.
And I didn't. I mean, he's in Walter Gottel's in numerous Bond films. He's in a lot of the Roger Moore Bond films. And I believe he's in the Living Daylights as well, and was supposed to be in My Choice as well, but couldn't do it due to...
Season 3 is one of my favourite seasons. I should have picked that up.
Paperclip's an epic episode. It's one of those driving forces to the X-Files.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, there we go.
Wow. Very good. Well done.
Okay, so anything else that you'd like to add for The Spy Who Loved Me, Jamie?
No, I think that's it. We've covered quite a lot there.
Okay. All right, we'll take a short break then, and we'll pop back with My Choice.
Yeah, well, seeing these films are so long. I've noticed these blockbusters, nearly 3 hours, 3 plus. I always need to go to the toilet, so yeah, I'm probably gonna have to take a toilet break. Oh, and I can also have a rant about popcorn when we return.
Okay, so welcome to the intermission. This is the part of the episode where I ask my guest a random question, a question they're not prepared for, and get their honest first answer. So, Jamie, are you ready?
I hope so.
Okay, so this is quite a general question, really, not really related to the episode. What do you think is the best movie poster ever made?
Oh, best movie poster. I'm just thinking whether that's difficult to come up with a response on the spot like that. But I'm going to pick out just ones that that I can think of at the moment that were particularly striking. A Clockwork Orange is a brilliant poster. And I remember having that on my wall as a student. It was probably what it's sort of best one I can think of, and just it's that iconic look of Alex as dressed as a droog, and yeah, it's just so striking, and the colours and the design of it. It's a classic. The Thing I love The Thing. It was one of my favourite films, and that's just, again, simple but very striking and effective. So sometimes the simple ones are the most effective ones as well. I think Alien is brilliant, and it's a combination of the visual, what it looks like, but then also it has to have a really memorable tagline. So in space, no one can hear you scream. Iconic. That's the three that I'm going to offer up just on the spot.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I'd go with that. I mean, when I thought of that question, one of the things that sprung to mind for myself was Reservoir Dogs.
Oh, yes.
Obviously, the iconic sort of standoff. Mr. Pink and Mr. White. Definitely. It's same as you. I think you sort of think back to what was an inspiration to me as adorning my bedroom walls, and that was definitely one of them. Around that time as well, there was Felicity Shagwell from The Spy Who Shagged Me.
Oh, yes.
But that wasn't a movie poster, that was just something personal. But yeah, I'd say Alien as well. Alien's definitely, it's simple, it's effective, and The Thing as well. The Fly is another one that I think I'll throw in that mix. It sort of, it shows exactly what it needs to show.
I'm going to podcast on The Fly at some point. It's my mission to do that. So hopefully I'll do it with MOVIEDRONE, because we did The Thing and The Blob, and then I wanted to finish it off with The Thing. The Fly.
Your personal apocalypse trilogy, is that what it is?
Well, it's three of the most perfect horror remakes I can think of.
You see, the other one I'd throw into the mix, not necessarily a movie poster, but a front cover, because it always used to draw my attention when I was a young lad, looking at the video store. It normally adorned the bottom shelf in the horror section, was American Werewolf in London.
Oh, yes.
Because it would have that mid-transformation shot.
Yeah.
And it always used to draw my attention. And it was obviously something I didn't watch till I was a lot older. But what a vision.
Yeah.
And what a film.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
I can't wait to one day discuss that on the Movie Joe podcast. But I'm sure we'll get there. Okay, so
can I give you my popcorn rant?
You can, yes, of course.
Yes, I feel it. I need to speak to you. I mean, I loved going to the cinema, but I have this anger of people who eat popcorn. I think it's, if you think that you got that message before the film starts, turn off your phones, stop talking, but they really should have something for silent eating, or at least attempts to eat quietly. The problem with popcorn, it's just the crunching noise, and then it's the noise it makes as it's struggling about in those great big boxes, the smell of it. Well, I went to 40th anniversary of Return of the Jedi with my daughter recently, and there was a guy right next to me, massive big box of popcorn, making this racket throughout the film. I think he stopped about halfway through, and he put his box to the side of me, and we both looked at each other and sighed with relief. It was over.
Lovely.
Just so irritating. Rant over.
But then it's not as bad as nachos. They serve nachos.
I know, that's any sort of food.
Do you know what? I'm going to go one better than that, because I'm a little bit mutton. I'm a little bit deaf. I can sort of zone those kind of background noises out quite a bit.
Right.
But I have a rather sizable nose, certainly sizable nostrils, so I have an acute sense of smell. And it was The Return of the King, which is a long old film in a cinema with no intermission, and the gentleman next door to me must have had the biggest bag of pick and mix in the world, and it was just emanating this horrible, sickly sweet smell for the entirety of the film, and it almost made me sick. So there we go.
Yeah.
It's not just down to your aural senses.
Yes, absolutely.
It's down to your schnoz as well.
Yeah.
And that completely put me off the film. Anyway, I think I can hear people coming back.
Oh,
taking
yes.
their seats.
Yes, so can I, yes.
We must be quiet and
okay.
head back to the main feature. Thank you, Jamie.
Thank you.
Okay, so that leads me to let you know what my choice was, which was from 1995 was Goldeneye.
When the world is the target.
72 hours ago, a secret weapon system was detonated over Savannah.
And the threat is real.
Goldeneye exists. A radiation surge that destroys everything with an electronic circuit.
You can still depend on one man.
I want you to find Goldeneye.
3.
Find who took it.
2.
And stop it.
1.
The name's Bond. James Bond.
The world's most famous secret agent is back.
We aim to please.
And this time, 007 is facing the ultimate enemy. The man who knows him best.
Hello, James. What an unpleasant surprise.
006.
What's the matter? No pithy comeback?
He was your friend, and now he's your enemy, and you will kill him.
Is the satellite in range? Target is London.
Now, the entire world is about to be caught in the crossfire.
See you in hell, James. You first. Kill him.
The pleasure will be all mine.
Did you check her out? Head to toe.
3 clicks, arms the fuse. Don't say it.
The writing's on the wall?
Grow up, 007.
I think you're a sexist, misogynist dinosaur, a relic of the Cold War.
You know, James, I was always better.
Both of you, stop it! You like boys with toys. Trick is to quit while you're still here.
I wouldn't think of it.
Charming, sophisticated secret agent. Shaken but not disturbed.
Get us out of here!
Bond, only Bond. The man just won't take a hint.
You don't need the gun.
That depends on your definition of safe sex.
On November 17th, United Artists brings you,
Trust me,
James Bond.
Why can't you just be a good boy and die? That's one trick I've never learned.
Directed by Martin Campbell, starring Pierce Brosnan, Sean Bean, Famke Janssen, Isabella Scorupco.
We'll go with that.
Yeah, we'll go with that. Godfrey John and Alan Cumming. Synopsis for Goldeneye. Years after a friend and fellow 00 agent is killed on a joint mission, a Russian crime syndicate steals a secret space-based weapon program known as Goldeneye, and James Bond has to stop them from using it. Goldeneye. This was the first Bond film that I remember being released. It was the first new Bond film I remember seeing, basically. It was obviously 6-7 years after the last release, which was License to Kill, 1989.
Which is the biggest gap at the time in the whole series.
Yeah, so it was a big deal. It was, I remember it at the time being a big deal, and the fact that there'd not been Bond for such a long period. So it was something I was interested in seeing. It was probably, as we discussed at the top of the episode, experience of James Bond was very much watching the classics on bank holidays and Easter and Christmas and things like that, and watching with my grandmother, which I've mentioned multiple times on this podcast. She was very much my introduction to a lot of different forms of cinema, and she very much liked the Bond films. So this was an event for me. It was something to look out for. It wasn't something I saw at the cinema. I'd have been 13 at the time, so not necessarily pop into the cinema of my own volition. It was something I saw when it came out on video. I think it was probably the first Bond that I owned on physical media as well, and I was just blown away by it. I think it was a very competent Bond film. Biggest point of this film really is the modernisation of James Bond. It moves away from some of those sort of classic Bond tropes, I suppose, when it comes to things like sexism. Maybe not to the point that
it doesn't. It doesn't.
It calls it out. It calls
the
sexism.
Out. Yes, it does.
It doesn't necessarily, it takes a long time in this film for the classic Bond tropes when it comes to women to come out, I think. Yeah. It doesn't necessarily scream it from the start. I forgot how much, how far into the film this is, but, obviously M is the big character in this film that calls out Bond's sexism. She calls him a sexist, misogynist dinosaur, a relic of the Cold War. Yes, exactly. And obviously that's another point of this film, is that it's post-Cold War. Obviously, a big point of the Bond films, pre-Goldeneye, are the Cold War.
Yeah.
More often than not, the stories and the main driving force of the films are the Cold War, and that's sort of gone here, but not. And M, the casting of Judi Dench, I think is a massive high point for this film. She would obviously go on to play a massive part in the Bond films after this, and she was always a high point in all of those films, I think, up until obviously Skyfall.
Skyfall, yeah, it's the final one, yeah.
Even though there is a bit of a reset in the canon in those films, she's there to call Bond out, whether it's on that sort of sexist standpoint or on a moral standpoint.
So does Miss Moneypenny.
Yes, exactly. This is the first time, obviously the classic Moneypenny played by Lois Maxwell, very much a character who is, smitten with Bond, and she's hankering for some attention from him. And then you've got Caroline Bliss, who played Moneypenny in the Dalton films, who's pretty much the same. She doesn't move the character on any distance. But then you've got Samantha Bond, the aptly named Samantha Bond. Very much like Pierce Brosnan, has sort of diminishing returns in the series. But here, she's not pandering after Bond. I'm not really that interested unless you're going to make good on your promises, really. It's right for the 90s. Yes, there's aspects of it that's not right in terms of Bond being a misogynist and sexist and sexism on the whole, but at this point, mid-90s, it's the right sort of movement forward in the Bond series, especially with the Moneypenny character. But you also get that with the Xenia Onatopp character. I think probably aside from Mayday in A View to a Kill, this is the most femme fatale Bond girl or character in the entire series.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Played fantastically well by Famke Janssen, who I have the biggest crush on. I had the biggest crush on her from this film. She just plays this amazing character who, again, very sort of strange.
Disturbing.
Yeah, she's getting off on the violence.
Yeah,
that's even for mid-90s, that's very, very ahead of its time. There's this point where at the Zephaniah installation, she guns down all these personnel, and she's getting off on it. She's biting her lip and all sorts.
She's moaning, and then to the point where the guy next to her looks at her with some concern.
Yeah, and this isn't something that's ever really been addressed in a Bond film. Maybe slightly subtext in past films, possibly, but this is just out and out. There's this point where she is on the verge of having sex with this admiral, obviously for the purposes of gaining access to this helicopter, and it's very much using sex to kill this guy. She kills him by suffocating him with her hips. Me as a 13-year-old young man, this was just
dynamite.
Yeah. And I've got to shout out to the bit where Bond actually gets on the boat and the body for this Admiral Chuck something, I can't remember his surname. He falls out of the cupboard and he's just got this face. this face of ecstasy. He's just obviously been killed and suffocated.
At a particular point of yes.
But yeah, and that really pushed the envelope, I think, for Bond films in terms of sex. I think they did it a little bit later on with Die Another Day, and Brosnan's sex scenes with Halle Berry was a little bit, but went from being PG to being 12, to being 15. Even though License to Kill was a 15, it was given a 15 certificate in this country.
It had to be cut to get that.
Yeah, exactly. And that was mainly down to its violence. It wasn't any more salacious than any other sort of Bond film. But this was, this was very much pushing the envelope in terms of censorship. But I think even though it has a lot of points that sort of point towards the modernisation of James Bond, it still has a lot of the staples. It still has a lot of those things that you're familiar with in terms of Bond. The Bond music. Shout out to the late, great Tina Turner. She's
absolutely
passed very recently. Written by Bono and The Edge from U2. But it's just quintessential Bond theme. This is, I always find it such a shame that Tina Turner didn't do more like Shirley Bassey did. Obviously, Shirley Bassey did 3 Bond themes, and I always think it's a shame that Tina Turner didn't get the chance to do a little bit more.
No, I agree.
And it's a great song, great opening song. And even the main Bond theme is saved till later on in the film. You don't hear that traditional Bond theme. I'm not going to attempt to do it now, but
we all know what you mean.
Yeah, exactly. You don't see that, or you don't hear that until at least 2/3 into the film, with the tank chase. You've got the obvious big action set pieces in this film. Really great opening with the dam jump, which I would say would rival the opening of Spy Who Loved Me. I think that's...
I do agree, but I would have to say that all of these elements were set up by A Spy Who Loved Me, and then sort of echoed and repeated by Goldeneye.
Of course. But even in terms of, I remember watching documentaries back in the day of how risky that dam jump, bungee jump was. Just even the most hardcore of daredevils would not even risk doing that because you're jumping against a wall.
And you see when he lands, he gets whipped back. I mean, the stuntman must have got some sort of injury from that because he's whipped right higher, and there must have been quite a strain on the body to do that.
You can just about tell that it's a stunt double. Just about. It's pretty close for a Bond film. It's pretty close. And then obviously jumping out of the plane, or jumping into the plane,
which is spectacular, but.
Very unrealistic.
I know you have to suspend your disbelief. I do understand that, but it is the most preposterous. Even you're not going to get Ethan Hunt in the latest Mission Impossible try anything like this.
No.
I mean, it's just no way with that. But anyway, I'll leave that.
Then I would present in evidence the tank chase, which is fucking monumental. Absolutely brilliant.
Clearly filmed on location, by the looks of things.
Yeah. exactly.
You certainly won't get away with that now.
And this is the point where you get the Bond theme. This is, this is Bond being his most Bond. He's, he's crashing through walls. He's straightening his tie. He is Bond being Bond, absolutely and unequivocally. And it's just an epic scene, I think. There's the obvious product placement with Perrier at this point as well.
Yes.
Which would be a bit of a staple of the Bond films until No Time to Die, really.
Apple products. Yeah,
exactly. Which is a massive shame, but they're in the money making business, I suppose, aren't they?
Yeah.
But yeah, it's still to talk a little bit more about the Bond staples of things. You've got the Allies, you've got Joe Don Baker as these sort of the CIA ally. Very sort of comical, little indiscretion with this car that won't work. Moves him on to Robbie Coltrane.
Again, the late great
Robbie Coltrane, and a cameo from a very young Minnie Driver.
I noticed that. Yes,
singing
with a very dodgy accent.
I had such a crush on Minnie Driver when I was a young man.
Now, can I ask you a question?
Go on, go.
And it's an echo, I think, of your first question to me. What do you think of the main villain?
Well, I think Sean Bean, is a competent villain in the grand scheme of Bond villains.
Mm-hmm.
I think he hams it up a little bit beyond his capabilities. There's certain points. I think the middle part of the film doesn't ring true. The bit on the train where he's trying to goad Bond and he's trying to say, she smells like strawberries and all this sort of thing, doesn't ring true. But I think the first part, the deception at the start of the film and the end of the film, really, that he's, this embittered supervillain who, wants to get revenge on the world and be rich and have more money than God, I think is the quote. I like that. I think where Sean Bean fails is being creepy.
Yeah, I think one of the main problems with Goldeneye is that it doesn't really know who the main villain is, or it doesn't have a clear enough sense of the central main villain. Because if you have Sean Bean, 006, I quite like the idea of it being someone who's, who's supposed to be a close friend of Bond. Now that's an interesting twist, but it doesn't really explain or explore what their friendship was.
Mm-hmm.
And then, so yes, you have the opening scene, which is quite well done. A bit of deception for England, James. And but then it takes, how long is it before he comes in the film again? It's well over an hour, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
And he then comes in, and okay, you get the plot reveal twist, which is effective, but you then have a villain really who hasn't really been established effectively enough. You have other characters that you think could end up being villains as well. And it's a case of so many sort of mini villains and not really a great enough understanding of who is the main villain in this film. And I don't think that Sean Bean is an effective enough actor, or he's given enough in the script to be more than he is or was in this performance.
Yeah, I wouldn't totally disagree with that. I think, like I say, I think the middle part of the film, it really struggles with the Alex Trevelyan character because it almost tries to make him an equal to Bond, and that he tries to be that sort of... There's a point when he first reveals himself to be the mastermind of this whole plan, and he says, what's the matter, James? No
pithy comeback or something like that.
No pithy comeback. And then sort of proceeds to be exactly that, exactly that sort of motif. And I think it does struggle in that middle part with making him be this nefarious sort of character, and it messes about a little bit with his character in the middle when, if they'd have just gone with, I was fucked over by the British government and my parents were fucked over by the British government, and I'm taking my revenge kind of thing. If they'd have kept with that a little bit more, it would have made him more of an effective villain. Not that I don't think he is. I think the chemistry between him and Pierce Brosnan is pretty good. I think you get that sort of impact of them being friends and them being allies. But yeah, to go back into some of the Bond staples, you've got Desmond Llewellyn at 82 playing the same character he's played.
Is this his last? Is it his last performance?
No. His last performance was The World Is Not Enough.
Was it the last one? Right, okay.
Yeah. But very much like The Spy Who Loved Me, the slapstick and the comedy, or the main sort of comedy elements of this film, are kept to the gadget sort of section. He's
hands off. That's my lunch.
Brilliant, absolutely brilliant way to end the scene with Q. Assuming that this sandwich is going to be some kind of nefarious gadget to dispatch villains. No, it's just his sandwich that he wants for his lunch. But you've got the introduction of the pen. Obviously comes in later in the film with Boris Grinchenko, played by Alan Cumming, who my first introduction to Alan Cumming was a sitcom called The High Life.
Oh yes, yeah.
I don't know if you remember that.
Yeah, I do.
I remember watching that on a Friday night. But he's pretty a pretty effective character as well. Again, I don't think it's something that you've really visited before. Probably the characters of Wint and Kid in Diamonds Are Forever, which were the sort of comic relief villains. That was probably the first time I can think since then that you've had a villain or a villain's ally who's been mainly the comic relief of the film. And you've also got time for a judo chop in this film, which I'd not really picked up on before this sort of last viewing, but I'd recently revisited some of the Austin Powers films as well. I'm thinking, he just gives Xenia a judo chop.
I mean, yes, you do look at these films in a different way post Austin Powers. You just can't help it.
Of course. But something we discussed earlier, I think this is the best Bond debut in the history of Bond. We talked about, obviously, Goldfinger is when Connery came into his own. Spy Who Loved Me, when Roger Moore came into his own. I don't think The Living Daylights is the better of the two Dalton films.
Do you rate Casino Royale?
I do, but I don't think it's better than Skyfall. For a long time, I really despised Skyfall because the villain wins in the end. Mm-hmm. In the grand scheme of things, the villain wins. And the end of Casino Royale is a complete dud. It's a big set piece thrown into a film that's really good as a spy thriller, but it's not great as a James Bond film.
It's got, I would say, 3 of the best set pieces in the series.
Casino Royale.
Yeah.
It
was close. It was close to being my choice.
Wow. Okay.
Well, yeah. I mean, there's the opening scene. I think with the sort of a sport, isn't it? Is it free running? Yeah, free running. That's it.
All right.
Yeah, with the guys that is a specialist free runner. That sequence is I think one of the best pre-sequence. It was a pre-credit sequence, isn't it? It's the opening scene.
I thought the pre-credits was the...
Oh, it is. No, yeah, it's the black and white sequence, isn't it?
Yeah.
Which again is really good. But the free running sequence, there's another sequence in the middle involving this sort of tanker. It's a fantastic set piece, and there's another sequence at the end. So three, well, at least two scenes anyway that stand out.
Okay.
And I do think Daniel Craig, as much as towards the end, completely fell off completely, but I think it was a strong start, and it's definitely a rival Goldeneye, I think, as best debut.
What I would say for Pierce Brosnan is diminishing returns, because Tomorrow Never Dies is good. It's not brilliant, I love Jonathan Pryce as the villain, brilliant, and Michelle Yeoh as a Bond girl. But other than that, there's not a lot of good stuff to say about that. World Is Not Enough is marginally worse.
Die another day.
Well, yeah, I think, and that all hinges on what I was saying about, what I'd like to say about Brosnan as a Bond is he doesn't do emotion very well. There's a slight speck of emotion in this film, obviously, you know, he's been portrayed by Alec Trevelyan, and he plays that reasonably, but obviously as it goes on through his films, you know, you don't get that he's that upset about the death of Terry Hatcher's character. He's not that upset about, well, he just doesn't play emotion very well, I don't think. You could even look at Mamma Mia as a...
I wouldn't know. I haven't watched it. I refuse to watch it. Sorry.
You don't need to watch it. Just watch the comic relief parody of with Philip Glenister playing the Pierce Brosnan character, and that's pretty much it.
Okay.
But Pierce Brosnan is not well known for his emotional performances, I don't think.
No.
And that's where he really falls flat as James Bond. There's not an ounce of fat on this film. It just keeps going, set piece to set piece.
How long is it? I think it's about. It's quite a bit over 2 hours, isn't it?
Just a little bit over 2 hours.
Is it? Yeah. I thought it was not 2 hours 20 or something like that. Because I think it should have been cut down to about 2 hours. I think it's about 20 minutes too long.
I can tell you, it is 2 hours 10.
Okay, 10 minutes too long.
Where would you take the 10 minutes from?
Well, I'd have to go over the scripts and see it scene by scene and decide then. But I think a Bond. I do have a bit of a thing about. So the latest Bond film that was 3 hours, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm.
It's ridiculous. You do not need a Bond film that's 3 hours. You don't need a Bond film that's over 2 hours, I don't think.
No.
And it's a real problem with some modern films that they feel that they need to justify two and a half hours, 3 hours. It's just ridiculous. They need to edit these films more. They need to write them better.
The only bit where it sort of loses me with this film is once they're ready to storm the bad guys' secret lair. There's a little bit of sort of 1-2 between Bond and Natalia, where why do you want to do this? That's probably it, though. I don't think there's much in this film that you could seriously cut down. I think there's probably more in The Spy Who Loved Me. You could cut that one of the scenes of we need to find this guy and then Jaws kills this guy. You could cut one of those out and not really lose anything from the film.
Fair enough. But the runtime, perfect. 1 hour 58. Just under that 2 hours. They must have been listening to me.
It's a tough one because I'm a big Bond fan. I like Bond films. I recognise that there is a lot of problems with James Bond films in general, whether that's sexism, even racism, a lot of the earlier films.
Mm-hmm. There's xenophobia, really, you could say.
Yeah, exactly. But you can take them for entertainment that they are.
Yeah.
And whether it's a bit of a nostalgia with Goldeneye being the first Bond film that I know was released, or I'm conscious of being released in my lifetime, I don't know. But I think, it just sort of moves Bond firmly into the 90s, and it takes it that little bit further and questions some of the staples of what Bond is.
Mm-hmm. So
maybe there's a little bit of that. Did you have any other considerations?
There are a few, yeah. So Casino Royale and Skyfall from Craig I would have considered. I didn't consider any more films. Maybe Live and Let Die, which I think is quite an interesting one, but it's just very different. Goldfinger, I would have considered. On Her Majesty's, again, From Russia with Love. I mean, there are plenty of choices. But to be honest, I did go for something that was more sort of comfortable for me from a nostalgia perspective, something I had seen a lot, and there was a bit more of a comfort factor connected to that. Whether it's the best Bond film or not is irrelevant. It's the best one for me. It's the most memorable one for me, so that's why I went for it.
Well, I think that's why this is such an interesting subject. Bond films, it really encapsulates what Movie Duel podcast is about. You know, we look at the films that are the best, the worst, overrated or underrated, and you could pick a different film for each of those categories based on a Bond film.
Yeah.
You know, my considerations, Goldfinger, like yourself, you know, obviously that's probably the staple of what Bond films became in terms of story, villain, music, the archetype of a Bond film.
The Bond car.
Yeah, exactly. You know, and for me personally, as you know, obviously up until a certain point, I'd selected License to Kill as the best.
So I prefer the Living Daylights.
Really?
Yeah, I do.
So
I think that's an underappreciated Bond.
Really?
Yeah, I think so.
That was my main point. You know, I don't necessarily consider License to Kill the best Bond, but I would consider it the most underrated.
Yeah.
Because I think it changes the perspective of what you consider to be a great Bond film. It changes the stakes of a Bond film. It's not just about Queen and country. It's about personal revenge for Bond.
So do you think they just pushed it too far? It was too gritty? It was too...
I think it was just not right for the time.
89, wasn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. You know, Bond was up against things like Die Hard and Lethal Weapon.
Yeah.
Where it wasn't considered... it was considered pastiche. And it was the wrong time for that kind of Bond film. If you'd have put that kind of Bond film in the Daniel Craig era, then it would be considered probably one of the best, I think.
I think the Daniel Craig era, you have to say that they were really responding to, you say, the Bond series, Jason Bond series at that point. They really sort of pushed the spy genre onwards, but then more so, I would say, Mission Impossible.
Yeah.
And that's what is, you know, you got that continuing, and it looks like that might push. I mean, I thought Fallout was fantastic. I'm really looking forward to the latest one. Wouldn't it be interesting to see whether it takes, what direction it takes the spy genre.
To delve into the Mission Impossible series, I loved the first one. The Brian De Palma original, brilliant, absolute brilliant. Exactly what it needed to be in terms of spy genre. Mission Impossible 2.
John Woo. Ridiculous.
Bag of shite. Absolute bag of shite. Atrocious.
Some great motorcycle stunts, but yeah.
Yeah. I didn't mind 3. I thought that was all right.
J.J. Abrams one, yeah.
Yeah, but I think that was helped by Philip Seymour Hoffman.
Yes, he's brilliant, yeah. I love him anyways. He's one of my favourite, again.
Yeah.
Departed.
Have you seen Licorice Pizza?
I haven't. No, I haven't.
You need to watch Licorice Pizza. Just
okay.
How brilliant his son is. Fantastic.
Right. Okay.
To use a MOVIEDRONE quote, that's your homework.
Okay.
But yes, other than that, I watched the next one, which I wasn't overly impressed with.
Yeah.
I can't remember what it's called.
I know which one it is. Yeah. That's the Dubai one, isn't it? They filmed in Dubai on the Burj Khalifa. Biggest, that's
all I can remember from it is got the guy from Lost in it, Josh Holloway.
Yeah. No, but maybe that was a bit of a dip, but I think Fallout and what's going to come in the next two-parter, I can really see something special. Do you not like Fallout?
It takes a lot for me to watch a Tom Cruise film.
I see. Right. There's we've got the nub of it now. There you go. Why didn't you say that before?
It takes a lot for me. I've watched too many Scientology documentaries.
Oh, I ignore all that. You have to just take it as a screen presence. Forget everything else. That's the only way I'm able to watch a Kevin Spacey film now. I mean, he's made some of the best films. Usual Suspects, Seven, some of the best films. I'm able to separate the art from the artist.
Yeah.
Oh, gone off topic here.
Well, no, I think it's a very good point to raise, because it's thrown at a lot of Bond films. You know, their past and the things that you can throw at them with regards to sexism, racism, or anything. You know, a lot of things that you can throw at Bond films. I think it's important to view them in the time that they were made.
Yep.
Definitely. Even at both of these films, you know, 1995 against 1974?
1977, same year as Star Wars. And the year of my birth. Which is why I said 40-something before. Now I can reveal my age. I'm 46. But that's one of the reasons why I wanted to choose an older Bond film. I wanted to choose one, you know, from the 70s or earlier, rather than, let's say, a Craig film. Because I think it's just got more interesting things to talk about as a product of its era as well. And it also needs to stand the test of time, I think. I think all of Craig's films, they need time to reflect on before you can properly appraise them.
And I think, you know, not to discount my own choice, but I think The Spy Who Loved Me is, as I've said before, it's quintessential Bond. It's not too sexist. It has the action set pieces. It has the Bond theme, but...
Has it got the Bond villain? It's got the Bond henchman.
It's got the Bond henchman. But then I would also... Something I've missed out on my choice is you've got Godfrey John, who plays Urumov, who plays a particularly great Bond henchman. A very underrated Bond henchman. But is he better than Jaws? Probably not. Stylistically, in terms of filmmaking, he's probably better than Jaws. But in terms of extravagance and...
Impact.
And impact, yes. Probably not. But then I would say that Sean Bean is a better villain than...
I don't think so. I don't think so.
Look, Alec Trevelyan gets dropped from a satellite to the ground, and then the satellite drops on top of him.
As soon as he goes down that ladder, you're thinking, you know what's going to happen here.
Stromberg gets shot through the barrel of his own elongated shotgun.
Yes. He does.
So, in terms of movie duel legacy, I would say we're almost at a tie.
You think? Yeah? Oh.
I think so. You've not convinced me otherwise.
I'm happy enough with a tie. I think we've argued our cases passionately.
Yeah.
And I think the things we've both conceded, but I think with both choices, inevitably an element of nostalgia is going to be there, and we've both admitted that.
Yeah, but you're also, you know, they're an element of their time, I suppose.
Yeah,
is a big thing with both of these films. In The Spy Who Loved Me, you've got Boob, and in Goldeneye, you've got, what's the word? I'm trying to think of this as nicely as possible. There is a
fetishistic, maybe
fetishistic
yes,
modernization of the Bond genre.
We'll
put it that way. But I would also like to throw into my argument for this film. For global revenue, adjusted for inflation, Goldeneye was the 7th most profitable Bond film, compared to The Spy Who Loved Me, which was the 13th most profitable.
But I think some of that could have been people that were not expecting it to be so good, because The Man with the Golden Gun was the least profitable of the whole series. So a lot of the people said, well, Bond is finished. I'm not going to bother going to see Bond. And then they missed this classic. So that's my...
Possibly.
Or they were too busy watching Star Wars for the 10th time.
This is very, very true. But they could also have been very preoccupied in 1995 with watching The Usual Suspects.
Oh, that's just a small independent film. But a classic.
Okay, so that leads us to the end of the episode then, Jamie. Thank you very much for joining me.
It's been a pleasure.
It's been an absolute pleasure. A quintessential pleasure.
Fantastic.
And I thank you very much for joining me. Would you like to let the listeners know about how they can hear some more of your work in terms of the podcasting world?
Well, for podcasting, I've done a few episodes. I've done 3 episodes for MOVIEDRONE. The latest one with my daughter, which was just a fantastic experience. Very proud moment. And I've done, I think, a similar amount for FILMBUSTERS. They indicate in the episode whether I'm on it or not. And I've got a few upcoming episodes for FILMBUSTERS in particular, but hopefully for MOVIEDRONE as well, and hopefully with yourself. Regarding sort of social media, you can find me on Twitter. That's where I do most of my social interactions. I do have a Facebook page, but it's not really active. For Twitter, it's MovieMania77. And Letterboxd, I've got accounts. It's just Jamie with Woody from Toy Story icon. So I'm happy to reply to anyone on those platforms.
So it just leaves me to say thank you very much to Jamie for joining me on this episode of the Movie Joe podcast. He will hopefully be joining us on many more, and just leaves me to say goodbye, and for Jamie to say